Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to Versus Stars podcast. All my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. This is a fantastic episode because aboard the mothership is T. Edward Bak. He is the creator of the Sea of Time comic. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Bak. Thank you so much for coming to the Versus Stars podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Totally my pleasure. Sure, it's a pleasure to talk with you. So I always start out with a question of inspiration. So what inspired your love for comics and who were your earliest influences?
Well, my love for comics goes back to, a lot of illustration stuff that I saw when I was a kid, especially artists like Jean Charlot. But I was reading, when I really started getting into comics, it was more like alternative cartoonists like Charles Burns, Dan Clowes, Hernandez Brothers, Julie Doucet, Linda Berry, artists like that.
So where did you come across those artists? I must admit, those are ones that I've been buying comic books for 30 something years and I'm not aware of them.
So I guess Charles Burns and Linda Berry were cartoonists at Evergreen with Matt Groening, and ended up doing a lot of comics for alternative arts news weeklies, where I was first exposed to their work. As far as growing up with comics, I wasn't reading a lot of superhero books. I was collecting a lot of Marvel movie adaptation comics and reading a lot of that stuff. But I didn't even come into knowing. I mean, I grew up knowing who R. Crumb was before I knew who Kirby was. So Kirby and all those Marvel guys came along much later for me.
So I read that you have that you have been a community education instructor for comics and graphic novels. So what does that mean exactly? A community education instructor?
So I don't teach a degree at a degreed level. My classes are all like open to anybody in the public who wants to take a class on comics. It's an intro to comics class that focuses on nonfiction comics like autobiographical things, journalistic comics, science, history-based comics, things like this.
Is that like American Splendor, that kind of stuff?
Absolutely. Yeah, we do teach Harvey Pekar work in there and stuff like Persepolis, Mouse,
Mm.
Joe Sacco, artists like that.
Mouse is absolutely fantastic. I've taught it before at my high school where I teach. It's such a wonderful
Okay.
book to teach.
Yes, absolutely.
So since this is, you said it's a non-credited course.
Uh-huh.
So what kind of people attend the class? Are these people just curious about comic books? Are these people looking for a profession? How does that work?
A lot of times I have, adult students who are interested in telling their own stories about their lives. But I've also had students who are like evolutionary biology uh, PhD candidates who are working on their thesis and they wanted to do part of their, work as a comic. So I've helped students like that along. Students doing history of suburbs, all kinds of different topics. But by and large, I get students who are interested in memoir and telling their own stories, telling their own, exploring autobiographical avenues. And then I get students who are just curious and want to do the prompts that I provide them with, every week. And, we do different stuff like your life in 8 objects types of things.
So is this story construction or story analysis?
We do a little of both, actually. Yeah.
Well, that sounds very cool. So as someone who is an instructor in the realm of comic books, how does teaching help further your understanding of the art form yourself?
Well, I always steal student ideas. Don't really do that. It does help me, in a lot of ways because it sort of like gives me a chance to reiterate things that I might be exploring and sharing with students. And if they're getting what I'm, uh, conveying, and I can see how it works with other students and the way they might explore the same ideas, and it's a learning experience for me as well. I'm there as a I I try to emphasize the fact that what I'm doing is guiding the students, not really teaching. So I'm trying to like set up some posts for them and just kind of like give them a cairn to along the path to check in with.
So, like, what do you think is the primary advice you give to someone who is in a class like this, who's looking to create a memoir, create a comic book? Is it, oh my God, don't do it? What, are you crazy? Is it, this is, the best way to approach it?
I think, I think comics is such a vast realm with so many different possibilities, that I would not dissuade anyone from, attempting to tell their any story they'd like to, with comics. And I do have, all kinds of different students from every walk of life who are interested in exploring, their own experiences. So I would never try to tell someone how to do it, but I definitely would show them examples of artists who may have done something similar to what they're interested in pursuing.
Would you say that it's easier now to enter the underground indie comic book world than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago? Is the challenges the same?
I think it's an interesting question. I don't know if it's easier or more difficult. I think it's just it's a place that has a lot of, great community, and I feel like if you're, if you're inclined to make your own comics, to self-publish, to really write, draw, do everything yourself, this is the place to do it. Like the underground independent stuff. That's and it's also a great place to explore different smaller publishers. If you want to, like, you know, um, if you're doing something that's very outside the mainstream, like you're not interested in a superhero comic, but even, there's artists who are doing stuff within that superhero realm, that's sort of adjacent to that, at least, that explore stuff like that in independent comics, alternative comics, things like this. And especially in like horror comics, there's a lot of like great independent alternative like horror comics that are being produced now. Artists like Julie Graffer, Corinne Halbert, Richard Sala, who, unfortunately passed recently, but all, so many great artists doing that type of stuff in independent, underground comics, alternative comics.
So
A lot of great publishers.
So when we're using the phrases, so for our listeners, like underground, are these comic books that are simply not the big two? Are these not superheroes, or is this a different way you would define underground comic book present in the present day?
Yeah. Boy. It's probably not the best place for me to talk. It's not the best place for me to talk to. I'm not really an underground cartoonist. I know some artists who are definitely underground cartoonists and definitely like working in that realm, but I know there's artists who may consider themselves underground, and maybe they're not as underground as they are, but as they think. But it's not for me to say, really. It's kind of an amorphous realm in a way. So there's a lot of different artists. There's a lot of different stuff. I think, there's a lot of edgy stuff. There's a lot of artists who think they're maybe doing edgy stuff, and I think it's best to leave that up to artists to explore and find out and discover themselves, really.
So I shouldn't ask which ones you count as underground and which ones you don't.
I don't want to go there.
So you're the writer and artist of Sea of Time from Floating World Comics. What inspired the creation of the series?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. There's a lot going on there. What's the fastest, easiest way for me to put this? I was working in Southeast Alaska a few years ago, and had an experience where I was working on a ship, and a small tour ship, and had just gone out there to kind of like get away from things, and had worked on a boat before that. But this was a 6-month contract where I was up in Southeast Alaska and didn't know anybody on this boat, and worked as a steward, really. But when I had time off, I would get off and go kayaking, and had some close encounters with marine mammals. And we were surrounded by whales and orcas and Dall's porpoises and sea otters, sea lions, and bears, wolves every day. I mean, we saw this; it was constant. And this is nothing to say of the birds, the cormorants, eagles, everything, mountain goats, all this other, I mean, just anything you can imagine, including like gigantic Sitka spruce glaciers. And it was just like, a completely life-changing experience for me. And I learned about a naturalist who came with the Russians in the 18th century to Alaska. I started doing some research, and I, kind of connected because I was at the same age as this naturalist was when he died. And I noticed, he had a lot of connection to traditional ecological knowledge and spent time with Koryak people in Kamchatka, spent a lot of time in Siberia. I was really interested in all this, and also kind of examining, as a Mexican American, examining some of the, indigenous uh, parts of my own family history. And so this was, a way for me to kind of like examine a lot of different stuff, including ecology, nature, that really just compelled me. Once I had been spending time up there, I ended up going back to school for environmental studies. And, I started drawing this comic, and the first graphic novel was published in 2014 with this same publisher. That was Island of Memory. So this book is the follow-up. The Sea of Time is the follow-up to Island of Memory, and chapter one kind of like picks up where that one left off, but also in a different sort of perspective. And then the second chapter will be actually autobiographical, and it's sort of like how I came to encounter this story and what got me started working on it.
That was very cool. So as I said, you're both the writer and the artist. So and very few people, I think, do both in their comic books. So how does this allow you to fully express your vision, being both the artist and the writer?
Okay, so yeah, that's it's interesting. As a cartoonist, I have to figure out what I'm working with. A lot of source material that is like, pretty old. I've had access to, through University of Alaska translators. I've had access to some of the original documentation and the original journals that were, previously unpublished. And it's been, for me, it's been a real honor to get into that stuff and do that research, and to like parse out like what I can use from the original text of this naturalist, which I'm using in my work. And I also have to characterize this individual as well as the people that surrounded him. So for me, it's a big deep dive into a lot of research, like looking at correspondence from the 18th century with, these characters, finding stuff that they said and wrote. So fortunately, there is a lot of that out there, and I've had to just weed through much of it in order to kind of build characterization. As far as the visual narrative, that's also a lot of research and requires me to just pay a really close attention, to the look of everything, and how everything occurred historically. But I also, there is some, obviously, some creative license that I have to take with some of this stuff. But for the most part, is fairly historically accurate. As far as his biography and the stuff that I'll be sharing about myself as well. I took a trip. I actually like did a sort of drawing expedition out in the Aleutian Islands after I had come back from Alaska. I went out there on my own at the same time of year that this expedition would have been coming back the opposite direction, returning to Siberia, because I wanted to spend time there and see what that was really like. So I spent time out there, spent time on a ferry that was, took a week to get back, spent time with an Unangan family, some of whom I'm still in touch with, to get their perspective.
So I found the comic book absolutely fascinating. A lot of really interesting, creative choices that you made. For instance, there's a lot of the comic book is black and white until the bird shows up, which is like the first shade of color. And for some reason, it kind of reminded me, and maybe this is a horrible connection, but I'm going to connect it anyway, to the Girl in Red and Schindler's List, where everything's black and white, but you have this one girl in red that kind of focuses your attention and kind of gives you a sense of things, something that you must follow this moment. So kind of go into creative decision of the Blue Bird.
That sort of picks up on a line from the original graphic novel, or a theme sort of that connects different time frames and different themes in different color schemes. The bird is named after, is actually a Steller's jay that was named after this naturalist. So that blue, it also like takes us into the blue from an earlier part of the first book, but also the blue from there's two birds that were both, from the same family. So that was one idea that I wanted to make sure, and draw those connections, because they recur thematically. And I felt like it was a good use of, kind of, highlighting that idea.
So, like I said, there's so many great aspects of that book. For instance, there's some fascinating tales of the manatees and the sea bears, which I thought was fantastic.
Thanks.
So, are these tales merely insights into nature, or are they revealing aspects of our nature as people? Are you making a comparison between how nature exists and the nature of humans and how we exist at a fundamental level?
The stuff about the sea lions and the fur seal and the sea cow, that all comes directly from Steller's writing. That comes from the writers, or the journals of the naturalist. And my purpose in, showing this stuff is giving a sense that of kind of what exists and what was lost. What it How can we reconnect with this sense of nature? And I'm trying to demonstrate that through a scientific narrative that explores, these things botanically, zoologically, natural history, also with, art, and also from the traditional ecological knowledge aspect, perspective of native peoples that Stellar encountered, that still live in the Aleutians and still, have this connection with nature and their environment.
And like I said, I thought it was so interesting. And going back to the idea of the title, Sea of Time, there's the story is made up of myriad other stories throughout the book, where you kind of discuss some are seems mythology, some is nature based, some then you have the primary characters. So does this kind of focus on the enduring nature of nature itself and how nature has grown and adapted over all these hundreds of years and have existed, or is it the enduring nature of the stories that represent the idea of your Sea of Time?
So the Sea of Time is the second part of the chapter of the full work, which is Island of Memory, Sea of Time. So kind of Sea of Time being this idea of, tides that move in and out, right? We have a very specific fixed idea of time that moves in linear form. And the suggestion with this work is that there are different manifestations of time, different manifestations of nature, different manifestations of, how we move through it, how it moves through us. And so that's one basic idea there. But also that this island of memory is kind of like this historical point that exists and is, surrounded in this idea of time that continues to move around and throughout.
So we're talking about the island of memory. You're talking about individual memory, or you talk about almost like a genetic evolutionary memory that people possess?
Island of Memory is the name of the first book, and it refers to an actual historical moment, but it is also sort of a double meaning about, the 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 purpose of the memory, the purpose of history, and the purpose of geographical and biogeographical perspective within this environment, right? So, do we remember? Who's remembering, right? What's remembered? Does the environment possess a memory of us, or are we remembering the environment?
Mm. And like I said, and so many interesting stuff. Like I said, you have the stories about the nature, like so the manatee seabirds, but you also have some fascinating stories that deal with links in science and traditional medicine, ancient beliefs, and things of that nature. Um, can you kind of go into a little bit the details about, because there's a part in it where you're discussing, like, don't forget the ancient beliefs, the ancient medicine, that nature, in the same conversation about science. So do you think that was it, the whole point of it, to kind of explain that maybe we dismiss kind of like the old traditions too easily, that you can't overlook that kind of stuff? Can you kind of go into those details?
Sure. I wanted to give give a sense that um, there's there's something that this guide Karim, who's based on a real person that Kreshnenikov wrote about. Kreshnenikov was a student that worked with Stellar on the expedition. He shows up on the last page. Uh, the guide Karim says the world is a coat sewn with many threads. And that's kind of getting at the heart of what's going on here. So there's science and there's traditional knowledge, folk tales, things like this that normally we think of as disparate and separate ideas. But to me, in this work, and also this idea of spirits within nature itself, the natural spirit. There's a Siberian deer goddess who appears on the cover and then makes an appearance throughout and is referred to in the traditional folk tale. So all these things are threads, and we don't have to follow one thread in order to understand reality. And I don't think time actually works that way. And I don't think that we need to, understand things from one single perspective.
Do you
And
think
I feel like one of the things that I wanted to, sorry, I meant to emphasize in the work is that, this guide mentions healing and a healing process and uses this traditional medicine for healing. The work is symbolic of that, and kind of like is a is a functions as a means to reconnect nature and humans, right? Because that rift, I think, is something that needs to be healed.
do you think that as we become more modernized and more, maybe, I don't know, temporal is the right word, but more in the moment of things, that people forget, or are becoming easier to forget the ideas of history in the past, and are less appreciative of kind of the traditions that got us to where we are?
I think the history is valuable, but I also believe that the cultural knowledge uh, has to be preserved and has to be observed and acknowledged. And I think, and from all perspectives, I think that all that stuff is valuable for us to consider. When we're looking at something like this naturalist, this stellar, botanist, the part of the point is that he's a botanist. He's learned Western medicine. He's learned Western science, Western zoology, but his botany is really informed by traditional ecological knowledge. Once he's in Siberia and he doesn't really know what these plants are, everything he learns, well, a lot of what he learns comes from native knowledge about plants and the environment. And I think that is something that gets overlooked in a lot of these expedition narratives historically. And I think it's valuable to consider looking at these things and understanding, oh yeah, there was a different perspective here at work that informs this as a broad picture, as a broad a broader interwoven narrative.
And like I said, another one of my favorite stories in the comic is the tale of the hunter and the daughter of the ancient goddess, which I thought was a fascinating tale. Which I guess is a folk tale of which group is that a folk tale from?
It comes from the Nifki. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Nifki people on Sakhalin Island. But there's different sort of variations around the Amur River and Amur River Basin in southeast, or sorry, Far Eastern Russia, Siberia.
So so basically the story, I like how the story links the story of how life flourished on Earth with the eventual love of these two characters. It's like a love story, but like all great mythology folktale, there's a meaning to how we got to where we are. And I think it's fascinating that it very much is similar to how a lot of all other mythologies seem to have a similar concept of, it's a story on one end, but it's also an origin story on the other. I thought that was absolutely fascinating how that all links together like that.
It's a healing story, really. It's a story about how the world at the time was too warm, and they had to destroy one of these suns in order for the life to flourish. And it had, so it's sort of also like a little metaphor about how can we restore the environmental integrity, right?
And well, the part that I thought was kind of interesting about it was that while life flourishes, it connects in the same, almost simultaneously, with the idea of these characters finding the hunter finding love. So like it's almost like love itself is also connected to the idea of life flourishing. Am I reading too much into it, or is that also one of the points?
I think that those characters are used to sort of convey this idea of maybe it's not so much mythological as it is something that conveys a sense of, or conveys the idea that the the uh, the the narrative's function is to demonstrate how the world is healed, right? So the healing takes place because of what these characters undergo, but it's not necessarily a love story, so to speak.
So you said this is a second book. How many chapters of Sea of Time are there going to be?
It looks like at least 3, possibly 4.
And where can listeners find Sea of Time?
Sea of Time can be ordered from me, which you can contact me through Instagram or Twitter, and I can get you a signed copy. I'd be happy to do that. Otherwise, your comic book shop, local comic book shop, should be carrying this, and Floating World Comics, who is the publisher, can be ordered online through them as well.
All right, that is awesome. Thank you, Mr. Bak, for talking with me about Sea of Time. It sounds awesome, or it was awesome. I enjoyed reading it.
I appreciate the kind words and the time, Jeff. Thank you so much. Great, you as well.
Sorry, my pleasure. Have a fantastic night, sir.